For years, documents mysteriously vanished. Interviews got erased from the official records. Witnesses were silenced. The academic world is hiding something so deep that it could change everything we thought about our existence. Stephen Hawking, one of the greatest theoretical physicists ever, kept a secret that few know about. What did he really discover during his last years? What made him question decades of his own scientific work? If you're watching this video, you're part of a select group of people who will have access to information that is systematically being removed from the internet. Before you continue, turn on the notification bell and leave a like so the algorithm doesn't hide this content. Your engagement now might be the difference between this truth being revealed or silenced forever. Stephen Hawking was more than an icon of modern physics. He was a man full of fascinating contradictions. While he publicly declared himself an atheist and materialist, in private he was exploring questions that went against that image. For decades, he kept an almost obsessive curiosity about the limits of consciousness. The few times he was asked about the possibility of life after death, his responses were deliberately evasive. "It's like a broken computer," he would officially say. "There's no heaven or life after death. That's just a fairy tale." But why, then, do his personal files reveal such extensive research into quantum consciousness? Why all those undocumented meetings with neuroscientists who specialized in altered states of consciousness? The answer began to emerge when a staff member at Cambridge University, cataloging the physicist's digital files, found something that shouldn't exist. An audio file, named only SWH022184 Omega, was protected by multiple layers of encryption. The file was hidden in what looked like an unimportant folder, among equations and lecture drafts. At first, they suspected a virus or an elaborate hoax. When they finally managed to open the file, Hawking's unmistakable synthetic voice came through. "These records are not for publication," the recording began. "What I'll discuss here contradicts my published work, but represents the logical conclusion of decades of private study." The silence that followed lasted almost 10 seconds. An eternity for someone who had to program every word with such effort. What came next would change everything. Cambridge panicked. The file was removed from the servers within hours. 3 researchers who had access to the material were put under extremely strict non-disclosure agreements. But it was too late, a copy had already leaked. And the content was far more disturbing than any theory about black holes ever proposed by Hawking. The recording revealed an unofficial interview, conducted by someone whose voice had been digitally altered. The initial questions were predictable about cosmological theories and recent contributions to theoretical physics. Then, suddenly, the interviewer changed the subject. "Dr. Hawking, based on your equations about quantum information and black holes, is it theoretically possible for human consciousness to persist after physical death?" The pause that followed was unsettling. Finally, the synthetic voice replied, "Officially, I would say it's impossible. Unofficially, I've discovered mathematical evidence to the contrary." What followed was a nearly 40-minute technical explanation, interspersed with requests that the material never be released during our lifetimes. Hawking then revealed his secret theory. Consciousness is not just a product of the brain, but a pattern of quantum information that interacts with the neural structure. "Just as I showed that information cannot be completely destroyed in a black hole," he explained, "there are theoretical reasons to believe that the quantum information that makes up our consciousness cannot simply cease to exist." His hypothesis was revolutionary. Consciousness works like a coded quantum field that uses the brain as an interface, not as a source. Death wouldn't destroy this informational field. It would only change its state and location. More shockingly, Hawking had developed a mathematical model suggesting that this informational field could, theoretically, reintegrate into a new compatible biological structure. "The law of conservation of quantum information requires that these patterns persist," he explained. "It is mathematically more likely that consciousness is conserved and transferred than simply destroyed. The implications are unsettling for our current understanding of reality." Hawking then detailed how his equations about black hole radiation could be applied to understand this phenomenon. The recording went on with details about experiments that were secretly carried out in laboratories on 4 continents. Using ultrasensitive quantum resonance equipment, researchers detected what Hawking called residual informational signatures, patterns that persisted even after all brain activity had stopped. These are not just statistical anomalies, he insisted. They are evidence of the organized conservation of information beyond biological death. The most alarming part of the recording is what happened to the scientists who collaborated with Hawking on this unofficial research. Of the 12 researchers mentioned in the audio, 5 disappeared from academia without explanation. 3 suffered sudden mental collapses. 2 died under circumstances described as accidental. The remaining 2 completely abandoned their scientific careers. One became a Buddhist monk in Nepal, and the other lives isolated on a small island in the Pacific, refusing to speak with anyone connected to the academic world. There are powerful interests for whom this knowledge is an existential threat, Hawking explained in the recording. Not only religious ones, but also scientific and governmental institutions whose authority depends on the materialistic paradigm. At a particularly tense moment in the recording, Hawking mentions having received discreet warnings from unspecified government agencies to drop this line of research. When I suggested that I would publish my findings independently, the threats grew more explicit. The audio reveals that documents were confiscated, experiments halted, and funding canceled. An entire laboratory in Switzerland, dedicated to measuring quantum fluctuations in postmortem brain tissue, was shut down overnight under claims of biosafety violations that were never specified. The most disturbing part, the recording contains digital noises at specific frequencies that, when analyzed with specialized software, reveal geographic coordinates and fragments of code matching classified projects in underground facilities. Who is controlling this information? And why all the effort to keep it hidden? While investigating the authenticity of the recording, I discovered connections stretching far beyond Cambridge. At CERN, physicists working on the Large Hadron Collider reported inexplicable quantum anomalies that coincided exactly with moments of clinical death in nearby hospitals. At the University of Virginia, researchers documented more than 2,500 cases of children with detailed memories of past lives, many containing verifiable information that would be impossible to have obtained by conventional means. Dr. Ian Stevenson, who dedicated his career to this study, found over 300 cases where children had birthmarks matching exactly the fatal injuries suffered by deceased individuals or people whose lives these children described with eerie precision. The most impressive part, when analyzing the brainwave patterns of these children using the protocol developed by Hawking's group, they showed identifiable quantum signatures that were not present in other subjects. In 2017, neuroscientists at Princeton University detected what they called cognitive echoes, patterns of a quantum field that persisted in rooms where patients had died hours before. These patterns partially corresponded to the neural signatures recorded from those patients before death. The study was briefly published in the Journal of Consciousness Studies before being retracted without explanation. All the researchers involved have refused to discuss the matter further. One particularly remarkable case took place in India. A 3-year-old boy started talking about his other home in a village 200 kilometers away. He described in detail a previous life as a mathematician, even mentioning specific theorems he had developed. When investigators took the boy to the village, he pointed out his old house, recognized relatives, and even led them to a hiding place where mathematical documents were stored, documents containing notes that were almost identical to the sketches the boy had been making compulsively ever since he learned to hold a pencil. The most extraordinary part, the mathematician in question had died 18 months before the boy was born, and his works had never been published. In the recording, Hawking explains what he called the compatible link theory, the idea that quantum information of consciousness seeks biological structures that match its informational patterns. It's not reincarnation in the mystical sense, he explains. It's the conservation and transfer of complex quantum information following principles we can describe mathematically. According to this theory, not all consciousnesses find new compatible hosts. Some remain in quantum indeterminate states, while others gradually dissipate. There's a kind of natural selection of consciousness, Hawking theorizes. Only certain informational patterns are coherent and adaptable enough to reintegrate into new biological structures. This concept would explain why only some people have memories of past lives, and why these memories usually focus on moments with strong emotional charge or personal significance. These are the more stable and coherent components of the informational field of consciousness. Complete autobiographical memory rarely survives the transition, Hawking notes. What persists are fundamental informational structures, talents, phobias, attractions, behavioral tendencies, and occasionally, fragments of especially intense episodic memory. The most impressive document mentioned in the secret recording is what Hawking called the Consciousness Evolution Protocol, a theoretical manuscript developed in collaboration with quantum physicists, neuroscientists, and even a linguist specializing in cognitive structures. This document, which Hawking claimed had been fragmented and hidden in 5 different locations for protection, represents the first serious attempt to unify quantum physics, neuroscience, and the phenomenon of consciousness persistence. The protocol describes how the quantum information that constitutes consciousness evolves through multiple incarnations. Hawking explains, "It isn't a random process. There is an inherent directionality, a trend towards greater complexity and integration." According to the theory, each cycle of informational transfer tends to preserve the most stable and adaptive patterns, discarding the less functional ones, creating an evolutionary trajectory for individual consciousness that transcends a single biological life. Even more shocking is the suggestion that this process can be technologically monitored and potentially directed. We developed sensors capable of detecting and mapping these quantum information fields, Hawking reveals. In theory, it would be possible to track the trajectory of consciousness as it transfers. He goes on to describe prototypes of devices that could facilitate or even direct this transfer processor technology that, in his words, would render the current distinction between life and death virtually meaningless. The implications of this discovery are mind-blowing. If consciousness doesn't end with death but continues in a cycle of informational evolution through multiple physical existences, our entire ethical and social structure would need to be rethought. Legal, economic, and political systems that treat human life as limited to a single existence would be fundamentally challenged. This knowledge could destabilize entire civilizations, Hawking admits in the recording. It's understandable that there would be efforts to suppress it. Even more disturbing is what Hawking calls Project Omega, an apparently multinational initiative dedicated to exploring military and intelligence applications of this discovery. They are developing methods to identify and track specific consciousnesses throughout their transfer cycles, he reveals. Imagine the implications for national security if a scientist, politician, or high-ranking general could be identified in their new incarnation, preserving significant parts of their previous knowledge. The recording suggests that this research has moved beyond the theoretical stage. In underground facilities in Siberia, the Nevada desert, and an unspecified location under the South China Sea, multinational teams are reportedly conducting experiments on human subjects, some volunteers, others not. The ability to direct specific consciousnesses to biologically optimized bodies represents the next evolutionary leap for humanity, an unidentified voice says at the end of the recording. Death as we know it will be obsolete within a generation. In 2018, 3 months before his death, Hawking appeared to have decided to leave this record as a kind of insurance. If something happens to me, he says, this knowledge should not be lost. He then details a set of equations, what he calls the mathematical proof of the continuity of consciousness, and provides coordinates for locations where components of the protocol can be found. The audio ends abruptly, with Hawking saying, "Remember, information is never truly destroyed. Not even in the darkest of black holes. Not even in death." Since this recording leaked, unsettling reports from research labs around the world have surfaced. At the University of Toronto, scientists reported detecting macroscopic quantum tunneling effects in brains at the moment of death, a phenomenon that, according to conventional quantum theory, would be impossible in biological systems. In Japan, researchers using high-precision magnetoencephalography documented what they call the ordered dissociation of neural information fields in terminal patients, a process very different from the chaotic degradation expected during brain death. And then there are the cases that defy any conventional explanation. The 5-year-old prodigy pianist in Romania who flawlessly plays compositions. He never studied compositions by an obscure 19th century composer with whom he shares an uncanny physical resemblance. The autistic child in Brazil who draws detailed architectural structures of a Japanese city he has never visited, a city where an architect with a similar condition lived and worked 60 years earlier. The 12-year-old cryptography prodigy in Australia who, without any formal training, solved a math problem that had baffled experts for decades. A problem that a mathematician, who died at the exact same time and day the child was born, had been working on. Coincidence? Maybe. But when analyzed using the parameters described in Hawking's protocol, all these cases show exactly the informational transfer patterns predicted by the theory. They are distinct quantum signatures, explained a physicist who wished to remain anonymous. It's like finding identical fingerprints on different people. Statistically impossible by chance. If you've made it this far, you're probably feeling a mix of skepticism and curiosity. Exactly how I felt when I first encountered this story. You might be wondering, why isn't this information in every newspaper? Why isn't it the topic of discussion at every university? The answer is in Hawking's own recording. The materialist paradigm is not just a scientific theory. It's the foundation of modern economic and political power. A world where consciousness transcends physical death is a world where power based on fear of death, fear of scarcity, fear of the other loses its grip. Think about the impact of this discovery. Religions that promise life after death would have their doctrines both confirmed and challenged at the same time. Economic systems based on accumulation during a single lifetime would lose their urgency. Justice would acquire a transgenerational dimension. Why do we spend so much time worrying about national borders and ethnic differences? Hawking questions in the recording, if in the next life we might be born as our current enemy. The protocol suggests that we are on the verge of a new era of human consciousness. An era where death is not an end, but a transition that can be understood and possibly even navigated. An era where our cycles of existence can be mapped, understood, and optimized. It's the singularity we have always sought, Hawking states, not through artificial intelligence, but through the understanding and evolution of natural consciousness. The implications go beyond science or religion. They are existential. If our consciousness follows an evolutionary path through multiple lives, this means that our actions have consequences that transcend our current existence, not only for others, but for ourselves. Every choice, every learning, every relationship becomes part of a larger trajectory. Compassion, the pursuit of knowledge, and personal development all take on a new dimension of importance when seen as investments in our transgenerational future. In April 2022, a retired neurosurgeon anonymously published a detailed report about experiments conducted at his hospital in the 90s. Using modified MRI equipment, his team detected what they described as the organized migration of informational patterns in terminal patients. It wasn't just diminishing brain activity, he wrote. It was information restructuring itself and moving in a coherent way. The report was quickly removed from all online platforms. At the University of Edinburgh, researchers investigating non-local consciousness phenomena reported increasing government interference in their work. First came funding cuts, explained one researcher who asked to remain anonymous. Then endless ethical reviews. Finally, visits from security consultants asking about our methods and results. The project was officially terminated in 2023, citing unspecified methodological concerns. If you're wondering why this research is so threatening, consider Hawking's own words. A humanity aware of its transcendent nature would be fundamentally ungovernable by current methods. Power structures based on materialism and fear would become obsolete overnight. And perhaps that's why you find so much resistance when you think about this subject. Our culture, education, and media condition us to automatically reject any suggestion of a reality beyond the material. This skepticism isn't accidental. It's a feature of the system, not a flaw. As Hawking observed, the greatest triumph of materialism was convincing people that any alternative is irrational or naive. But the truth, the mathematical, physical, empirically observable truth, is that consciousness is far more complex and enduring than we've been led to believe. And this truth is gradually emerging, despite all efforts to suppress it. We are living in a paradigm shift on the scale of the Copernican revolution. Just as humanity had to come to terms with the fact that the Earth is not the center of the universe, we now face evidence that our consciousness is not confined to a single biological life. Like every paradigm shift, this will be resisted, ridiculed, and finally accepted as obvious. The most fascinating part of the protocol is its prediction that this knowledge cannot be permanently suppressed. The very nature of consciousness ensures that this truth resurfaces repeatedly, Hawking wrote. Those who discovered it before return, remembering fragments of their previous knowledge, rebuilding the evidence, advancing the frontier a little further with each cycle. If this sounds familiar to you, if it resonates with these ideas, maybe it isn't the first time you've explored this frontier. Perhaps your déjà vu, recurring dreams, or inexplicable interests are fragments of previous knowledge coming back. As the protocol suggests, amnesia between lives is never complete, only fragmentary. We are starting to see signs of change even in the most conservative institutions. In 2023, the Journal of Consciousness Studies published a special issue on non-local models of consciousness continuity. Prestigious universities are discreetly establishing departments for transgenerational consciousness studies. And billionaire investors in Silicon Valley are funding startups dedicated to what they call continuity technologies, a fancy term for methods to map and potentially transfer consciousness. You probably felt a mix of emotions when hearing this story: curiosity, skepticism, hope, maybe even fear. These reactions are natural when confronted with ideas that challenge our most fundamental assumptions about reality. But beyond those initial reactions, I invite you to consider, what if it's true? And if, as Hawking suggests, death is just a transition and not an ending? How would that change the way you live your current life? Leave in the comments your own experiences, moments of unexplained knowing, talents that seem to appear out of nowhere, connections with places or times you've never known. If the protocol is right, these aren't just psychological curiosities, but valuable clues about your conscious journey. If this video resonated with you, support our ongoing investigation by liking and subscribing to the channel. Share it with those who are ready for this conversation. Together as a community, we can overcome the suppression of this knowledge and explore its deep implications. As Hawking might have said, the truth about our conscious nature does not belong to any institution or government. It belongs to humanity as a whole. And perhaps the greatest irony is that this man, physically confined to a wheelchair, may have been the one to finally prove the true freedom of human consciousness, a freedom that transcends even the boundaries of death. The journey has only just begun, and you are no longer alone on it.